Today, organized labor unions have kicked against the proposed 48,000 naira minimum wage from the federal government, describing it as ridiculous. The NLC President Joe Ajero explained that government is not ready to negotiate with labor on the new minimum wage. He explained that the federal government doesn't have the necessary data to negotiate with labor. The NLC and TVC had proposed that the federal government should pay Nigerian workers 615,000 naira minimum wage, citing high cost of living as the yardstick for the proposal.
The government's proposal of a paltry 48,000 naira as the minimum wage does not only insult the sensibilities of Nigerian workers, but also falls significantly short of meeting our needs and aspirations. In contrast, organized private sector proposed an initial offer of 54,000. Though it is worth noting that even the least paid workers in the private sectors receive 78,000 naira. As clearly stated by the organized private sector, highlighting the stark disparity between the proposed minimum wage and prevailing standards, further demonstrating the unwillingness of the employers and government to faithfully negotiate a fair national minimum wage for workers in Nigeria.
Joining me now on this development is Secretary General of the Trade Union Congress, Nuhu Toro, who's scheduled to join us on the program this evening. We're working on that connection as we speak, but organized labor has described as ridiculous. Government and organized private sector offers a 48,000 naira and 54,000 naira respectively. Recall that prior to this time, organized labor published a breakdown of its proposed 615,000 naira, citing accommodation and I think transportation taking the largest chunk in the breakdown. Nuhu Toro joins us now for more on this development. Mr. Toro, thank you for joining us. Help us understand what really happened at that meeting where government and organized private sector came up with their own figures.
Sorry, could you take that question again?
I'm asking what actually happened at that tripartite committee meeting where federal government and organized private sector came up with their own proposed figures.
Okay. Good evening, Nigerians, and thank you for having me. What played out at the tripartite meeting, in our opinion, was insulting. Insulting in the sense that the offer that was made was 48,000 naira. It's ridiculous that that kind of a figure is coming out from the government. It is also important to stress the fact that common sense should tell anybody that the current minimum wage is 30,000. And we were also able to get 35,000 naira wage award. So if you add 30 and 35 already, you have 65,000 naira. And we were taken aback and we felt was not sensitive to the needs of the workers. If you look at the 35,000 or the 30,000 naira that is currently paid, we asked the question even at the meeting that the dog in their houses, in political elites' houses, will 48,000 naira be sufficient to feed them in a month? Your answer is as good as mine. So we found that offer insulting, inhuman, and unacceptable.
So organized private sector also proposed 54,000 naira, which is of course less than 78,000 naira that they say their members, according to them, none of their members pay less than 78,000 naira. Why do you think both of them are proposing a lower figure than what is currently being paid? Is there some standard practice to this regard?
No, not at all. There's no standard practice, but I think they are just being smart by half. Being smart by half in the sense that they are coming to negotiations and they are trying to diminish the starting point, which of course, head or tail will not take them anywhere. It is good we confront the issues realistically, bearing in mind the current realities and the current challenges confronting this nation. You and I know that the valuation of the naira is also very critical and central to what workers earn. These are these dollarization that keeps fluctuating. So all of that are critical issues that must be factored in. And we have provided a table of what we think a worker will require to sustain him in a month. So if they are bringing a contrary opinion, they should be able to tell us, because we asked them in the meeting that what does the 48,000 naira translate to in terms of value and in terms of specific. Will you, for instance, will you take 48,000 naira to just transport yourself to work and that's the end? You will not feed, your children will not go to school, you will not get a roof over your head. That is not fair.
No, federal workers are currently, what they currently earn vis-a-vis what is being proposed. I think I heard the TUC president say that they already earn up to 77,000 if you add up the 35,000 naira that government, started paying. I think President Buhari, when he left office, the last person in the federal ministry was actually earning 42,000. And now, if you factor in the wage award of 35,000, that drives the figure up to 77,000. But that wage award, in the real sense, according to the federal government, is more or less, a palliative following some of the decisions we saw earlier on in this administration. Can that pass for, what they earn as a minimum wage vis-a-vis what organized labor is proposing?
Exactly, it could, because don't forget, there's inflation. There's high cost of living in the land. So when you relate the quantum of what a worker earns with the cost of living, you will agree with me that, that amount, that figure that the organized labor is quoting, even though we know in the course of negotiations could tinker a little, is what will sustain a worker. But I cannot be under any illusion to think that 48,000 naira as minimum can sustain a worker, his wife, and 4 children in a space of a month. That is ridiculous. It's not possible. It's not possible.
So I understand you're concerned about 48,000 naira, but let us talk about the figure that TUC and NLC are proposing. You recently released a breakdown of 615,000 naira, with food and transportation taking the largest chunk. How feasible is this proposed figure in the real sense of it?
Well, first, it's feasible. It's feasible if government elites cut down on wasteful spending. We know very well that we have enormous resources to deal with the demand that we are putting forth. So if there is a will, there will always be a way. If our elite, especially the state governors, cut down on wasteful spending, we are very optimistic that there will be enormous resources to be able to pay the working people the living wage. Don't forget, the most valuable resources any nation can have is the workers. And ironically, the Nigerian workers, are not getting anything commensurable to the services they render, which is wicked, is unacceptable, is inhuman.
Labor leaders are saying nothing less than a living wage is condemning workers to poverty. And while you have proposed 615,000, what you call a living wage, governors have said the agreed amount has to be something sustainable. Do you think that you'll be able to find a nexus between minimum, sustainable, and living wage before the end of May?
Of course. Like I said, the nexus is for governors to cut down on their wasteful spending. If they do, believe you me, we know that there are enormous resources in the state to deal with the minimum wage we are talking about. The workers are swallowing too much. First, it was subsidy removal that affected the entire fabric and livelihood of Nigerians. Secondly, they now increased the tariff on electricity. don't forget, electricity that they are increasing tariff on is not available. So we don't want to be thinking these are World Bank and Wall Street and IMF policies that they are pushing through our throats. And people forget oftentimes when they try to implement World Bank, IMF policies, who climb on sinker in Nigeria with what is done in other spheres. They are different environment altogether. What is successful in the United States of America, for instance, cannot be successful in Nigeria. So our leaders need to rethink all of these policies in such a way that they will think about our diversity, our peculiarity, and our need. So until that is done, we will always have these kind of issues arising.
Just to put it in right perspective, the availability of electricity you talked about, I think is relative. You know, the band A category, to an extent, seem to enjoy more power supply than the rest. I'm sure you agree on that.
Well, that is the opinion. That is also debatable, because who are the categories in band A? What is the availability of this electricity in relation to the cost that is being charged currently? And you see, I feel pain that electricity or power generation is something that is endowed naturally by God Almighty. The same thing with the case of petroleum product. God, in his wisdom, decided to give us these products for free. And up till now, our government or the private sector or the people managing it have found it difficult to ensure its functionability. So that's part of the problem.
Yes.
So if you look at the availability of electricity, like I've said, a private sector, a informal sector worker needs electricity to power his generator because there's no electricity. A barber needs electricity to power his generator. And when this electricity is not available in relative terms, then it becomes debatable how that informal worker can be sustained.
The big question right now will be what happens next, because what government is offering is less than 50% of what workers were earning before. This administration has had its fair share of labor disputes in the past year, Mr. Toro. What can be done now to persuade labor, since you're saying all conversations around the new national minimum wage must be concluded by the end of this month?
Well, I think the reverse is the case. The reverse is the case in the sense that you need to persuade government and private sector employers to pay decent wages to Nigerian workers. That is what we need to do. And like I keep saying, if there's a will, there will be a way. If they cut down on wasteful spending, there will be enormous responsibility, there will be enormous resources to be able to deal with the current wage deficit in Nigeria.
But I'm asking really that what happens if this is not resolved at the end of this month?
Well, of course, you know, under the Labour Act, there are so many ways that labor unions can advocate and fight for their rights. All of those hanging fruits in the Labour Act, we are determined to leverage on to ensure that we defend the income of Nigerian workers. So invariably what that means is whatever we need to do as organized labor, the Trade Unuion Congress of Nigeria and the Nigerian Labour Congress will do it. So we want to reassure our workers that they should remain calm. As leadership, we have a responsibility and we'll do everything possible under the law to ensure that their rights and privileges are protected, especially as it relates to the minimum wage.
It's one thing to deliberate the wage, but implementation is another thing entirely. The question of whether or not the minimum wage is binding on these stakeholders, and that, you know, we're also hearing the body language we're getting from state government is that they want to pay what they can. You've heard them say through the Nigerian Governors Forum that we're working on what individual states could sustainably pay. So if we have a situation where some states struggled with a 30,000 naira, are you more concerned? Shouldn't you be more concerned about the ability of state governments to pay? Because how do you expect them to pay 615,000 naira if some of them did not even pay, you know, when it was 30,000 naira?
We also share same concern, but I would like viewers to understand that The minimum wage principle is to set a benchmark, and that benchmark is a framework or a borderline which no employer of labor should go below. That does not mean if, for instance, what a worker in Yobe earns, we are not saying what a worker in Yobe earns must be the same with what a worker in Port Harcourt or Lagos, for instance, earns. But the minimum wage is set to protect vulnerable workers. Because if you try to rate the income of Lagos, for instance, and that of Yobe, of course, Lagos earn more. So invariably, we will not think or expect that what Lagos will pay will be the same thing Plateau State government will pay, or the same thing that Yobe State government will pay. So that brings the concept behind the formation of the minimum wage is to set a benchmark to protect vulnerable workers, and that no employer of labor should go below. So if that is done, I'm sure it will go a long way in ensuring that workers get what rightfully belongs to them. And not forget, when we said give us 600,000. 600,000, for instance, in my opinion, is what we think a worker should earn to ensure that he's able to sustain himself for the period of a month. So, and in negotiation, you don't go with fixation. You go with good faith first. You go with sincerity of purpose, and at the end, it will be a win-win situation.
All right.
So what was missing from the government posture in that meeting was good faith. They didn't come to the negotiation with good faith. Somebody is asking for over 600,000, and you are giving him 45,000 naira, 48,000 naira. I mean, that is an insult and is unacceptable to us.
You actually asked for 615. Have you reviewed it downwards to 600? Because you kept saying 600,000. Mr. Toro.
Sorry, I didn't get that.
I said you actually asked for 615, but I heard you now say 600,000. Have you reviewed it downwards?
Over 600. Over 600. So 615 is over 600,000.
So I'm sure you are aware that the Cross River State Governor has announced 40,000 naira as minimum wage. Governor Obaseki in Edo also says that government will pay 70,000 naira. Interestingly, these figures are even higher than what government just recently proposed. But do these announcements, without waiting for the outcome of this committee, suggest in any way that they might have opted out of any anticipated recommendation by the tripartite committee?
No, I'm not sure that is correct. In my opinion, I think what those two states have done is testing the water to see what the reaction of labor would be. They are trying to see what the reaction of labor would be. But you agree with me that, I mean, by the time a minimum wage is legislated or becomes a law, it is pertinent on all state government and employers of labor to abide by it because it's a law. So what they have done is should I say, a step in the right direction? Because I want to assume they think that the workers in those states deserves more than what they are earning now. So preceding the negotiation of the minimum wage, they decided to scale it up. That is good. But again, that will not deter us from ensuring that they comply with the Minimum Wage Act.
Mr. Toro, we have to go now, but you walked out on that meeting. What happens next?
Well, we walked out because the government and the employers in the private sector didn't come with good faith. If they are sincere and we see sincerity of purpose in them, of course, we are not averse to negotiation. We are not closing the doors, which means the organized labor will be available to genuinely negotiate, not to be insulted by government and employers of labor.
So you're expecting government to call you back to continue negotiation, right?
Well, invariably, if they do, and we see from the antecedents that they are sincere, of course, why not? We cannot close doors to negotiation. It is only through negotiations that we can get value for our workers, and that we are open to.
Secretary General, Trade Union Congress, Nuhu Toro, thank you for talking to us on the program this evening.
Thank you.
And that's our show today, everyone. You can watch it again at midnight and at 6 a.m. tomorrow. I am Nifemi Oguntoye. Thank you for staying through.